You know, we're all taught that private property is this natural thing, something you get through hard work and a fair deal. But what if that whole story isn't the truth? What if it's a cover for a much more violent beginning? Today, we're diving into a really challenging idea from our source, that the concept of ownership itself is actually built on a history of conquest.
This line right here, it cuts straight to the point. The idea is that property law isn't the alternative to taking things by force. It's just the next step. It's conquest with a law degree, all sanitized and written into our legal codes.
Okay, so let's break this down. On one side, you've got the common story. You work hard, you mix your labor with the land, and poof, it's yours. It's all based on reason and law. But the hidden history our source presents tells a totally different tale. One where property starts with domination, where force comes before the law, and where ownership is really just theft that gets legalized after the fact.
And this phrase just sums it all up perfectly. The whole system shifted, you see. It went from open violence, conquest with swords and armies, to something more subtle. The predation didn't stop, it just got bureaucratic. Now it's enforced with deeds, titles, and legal documents. It became predation with paperwork.
So let's really get into this foundational idea in our first section, the argument that property comes from control and domination, not from some nice mutual agreement. The core concept we need to understand is what this source calls historical theft. And this isn't like a simple mugging. It's a huge systemic process. We're talking about taking land and labor from entire communities, using legal tricks and brute force. And then the state steps in and gives it a stamp of approval, turning stolen goods into legitimate property.
To see how this actually worked, let's look at our main case study, the Enclosure movement in England. This wasn't some dusty historical event. It was the brutal, real-world application of historical theft that literally became a blueprint for the rest of the world.
So how did they pull this off? Well, first you had what were called the commons, land that everyone in a village could use. Then, step 2, new laws get passed that let wealthy people just take these lands. Step 3, they put up fences, physically blocking everyone else out. This leads directly to step 4, mass displacement. People whose families had lived off that land for generations were kicked out. So what happens to them? They have nothing. Their only choice is to flood into the new cities and sell their labor for a wage. And that's the whole point. Enclosure didn't just create private property. It created a landless working class that had to work for someone else to survive.
So who made sure those fences stayed up? Who threw people in jail for trespassing on land that used to be theirs? The state. According to our source, the state wasn't some neutral referee here. It was the muscle, the enforcer, using its power to make sure this new property arrangement stuck.
Of course, a theft this massive needs a good cover story. So this next section is all about the powerful ideas, the philosophies that were cooked up to make this whole process seem not just legal, but actually moral and right.
And this quote from Red Cloud, it just hits you right in the chest. It shows you the devastating, real-world outcome of these philosophies. This wasn't just some abstract debate in a university. These ideas were used to justify taking everything from indigenous peoples all over the world.
The main tool they used was a legal doctrine called terra nullius. It's Latin for nobody's land. And the idea was simple. If land wasn't being used the European way, with fences and farms, then it was considered empty, vacant, up for grabs. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was a deliberate strategy of erasure.
Because the land wasn't empty, not even close. It was full of people, traditions, and sacred places. To declare it nobody's land was to pretend those people didn't exist. So this wasn't just a theft of soil. It was a theft of presence, a theft of memory, and a theft of the deep relationship people had with their land. And don't think this was some fringe idea. This papal decree from 1455 shows that this logic came from the very top. This was basically the spiritual and legal permission slip for building an empire. It framed conquest not as theft, but as a holy duty. So this religious argument eventually morphed into a pillar of modern political philosophy, and the person who famously gave it this secular makeover was the philosopher John Locke.
So here it is, Locke's famous labor theory of property. He says that when you mix your labor with the land, it becomes yours. But listen very carefully to the words he uses. Tills, plants, improves, cultivates. He's defining labor in a very specific European agricultural way. And here is the direct result. If your people were hunters or gatherers or lived nomadically, your way of life didn't count as labor under Locke's rules.
That meant your land wasn't being properly used. It was waste and therefore totally ripe for the taking by people who would improve it. It's the same logic of enclosure, just dressed up in philosophical language.
And this brings us to our conclusion. Let's trace how this long history of predation has directly shaped the world that you and I are living in right now.
You see, the model that was perfected in England wasn't a one-off. It became a global blueprint for settler colonialism. The American Homestead Acts, Australian land rulings, the zoning laws under apartheid in South Africa, they all follow the exact same pattern: push out the people who are already there to create private property for newcomers.
So the source's final point is this. This isn't just history. The wealth of our modern world, our cities, our factories, the entire economy, it was all built on top of this original act of theft. It's a legacy that is literally under our feet, whether we see it or not.
And so we're left with this really unsettling question. If the very foundation of ownership is rooted in conquest and theft, what does it mean for any of us to own something today? It's a heavy thought, and one that kind of forces you to look at everything around you in a completely different light.